Hello, everybody. It is so weird to be doing a YouTube class again because I've only been doing Zoom events for the last month and a half or so. So on YouTube, I'm just talking to a green light on my computer screen. So if I start trailing off and I'm not sure if anyone's there, chime into the chat room. Please tell me you're listening and watching and hopefully tasting some delicious wines. If y'all are tuned in, go ahead and just tell me in the chat room who you are, where you're coming from, and if you got the wines that we're tasting tonight, or if you're just tuning in to enjoy the class. I'm here with, turn this around, Som Mom and Som Pop, and lots of fluorescent lighting. Really, really excited to resume these Saturday night classes every Saturday night now. For as long as probably until like springtime when restaurants start opening up outdoor spaces again. So, hey Tawana, I think you have officially attended every single class. So you are the winner tonight of the prize of most loyal students. So thank you so much for all of your support. Chris Bonzek and Mary from Newport News, great to see y'all. What? All right, Steve Hill is my father, and sometimes he just types things to make a reaction out of me. So, hey Lorraine and crew, really excited to see everybody. No, he hasn't been drinking, but he has been painting today, so maybe the fumes, you know. So Todd and Hillary, I think y'all are brand new. This is your first class, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe you attended as guests of other people, but I think this is your first class, so congratulations. Welcome to the slippery slope of tribe members who started drinking wine casually, and now we're too far gone to go back. So welcome to the tribe. Yes, I would agree with that, Chris. It's funny. He's a computer IT guy, so of all people to not believe that. All right, so let me break down how tonight's going to go, because tonight's going to be quite different than definitely the last 2 months of classes that we've been doing, and different than any other blind tasting that we've done. What we're going to do is a little bit more informal style, a little bit more discussion on objective qualities on wine versus subjective qualities on wine. We're going to talk about how wines are priced, what goes into making a $100 bottle of wine versus a $15 bottle of wine. We are going to taste 4 delicious wines, and we're just going to have a little bit more fun doing it. So obviously we're not guessing the grape or the region. None of the labels are obscured for this tasting. We're really just going to be tasting all of these wines to not decide whether or not we like one or the other. That's of least importance to me. I don't care about that at all. Until it comes time for me to make recommendations for your next 6-pack, then I want to know that information. But for the purpose of this class, we're going to be analyzing the wine, not talking about whether or not we like it. Maybe at the end we can do that. But at the beginning, we're really just analyzing the structure of the wine, the components of the wine that go into making a wine higher quality or lower quality. And again, I don't sell like cheap wine. I wasn't trying to trick anyone in selling like a wine that tastes like it's twice its price and a wine that's bad, that's expensive. All of these wines are like appropriately and adequately priced, so there's no tricks here. We're just going to be talking about some objective and subjective qualities about wine. Really, really excited for this class. So if you haven't already, go ahead and pour yourself the first 2 wines. So this one right here by Biggio-Hamana from Oregon, Ribbon Ridge, specifically in the Willamette Valley, called the Beecha. We're going to do this in glass number 1. Now, I always do when we do side-by-side tasting, so you need 2 glasses per person. If you don't already have those out, go get them now. You will need them. We're going to go from one to the other side by side. Make sure your glasses are clean and polished. If it smells like soap or cardboard or dust or cabinets, then your wine will too. So this is going to be wine number 1. We always serve wines on the left if they're number 1. So I could say pick up the glass on the left, or I could say pick up wine number 1. Either way, those are synonymous. So just like I read left to right, I assume you do too. we're gonna taste left to right. So that means wine number 2 is the Domaine de la Motte Pinot Noir from Languedoc, France. So that is gonna be wine number 2, glass on your right. So make sure you have some hefty servings. So, well, mine, these were more hefty, but I've already, I had to taste test the wines to make sure that they were good. So mine have already gone down a little bit. But you want enough to taste the wine multiple times. So don't just pour yourself 1 ounce. I don't think anyone here is going to have a problem pouring themselves enough wine. So we're gonna do the cabs in a second round. We're gonna use the same glassware for that. Don't worry about like needing 4 glasses per person or washing anything. The cabs will not be affected by a little bit of wine, a little bit of Pinot Noir in your glasses. So we're gonna start off with the Pinot Noirs. And here is, go ahead, you can start smelling it. If you've already started tasting it, it's totally fine. I wanna break down a couple of the things that we are not going to discuss when we're trying to figure out the quality of these wines. By the way, one is basically half the price of the other. So the other is double the price. So, so they're not really close. And again, I'm not trying to trick you. One's just half the price of the other. So we're gonna see if the quality kind of aligns up with the price. And if you, in your opinion, agree with that. So, so as we start tasting, let's go ahead and talk about what we're not gonna talk about. I've already mentioned it once, but let me mention it again, because anyone who chimes in the chat room until I ask, I'm gonna give you some demerits and take away the rest of your wine. I am not going to ask, or do I care about whether or not you like 1 versus 2. So try not to even think about that. While you're tasting these wines, try not to like taste 1 and be like, oh yeah, I like this. Oh, 2, I like this more. Don't let your brain go there, because quality has nothing to do with whether or not you like it. We could all like the wines that are cheaper and then not actually enjoy the wines that are more expensive. So try not to let that affect your kind of tasting notes of these wines. At the very end, we can do that. Again, this doesn't make me a great salesman, but this is part of objectively analyzing wine. What we are going to discuss is, first of all, the structure of the wine. So we're going to talk about acid, tannins, mouthfeel, body, all of those things that make up the structure of a wine. So generally speaking, a higher quality wine is going to have better structure, better overall structure. So just like if you're a weightlifter, if you have better muscular balance and better bone structure and all of this stuff, you're going to be able to lift heavier weights. The quality of your weightlifting is going to be higher versus if you got severe osteoporosis and arthritis and bad muscular imbalances and stuff like that. So the structure of both humans and wine makes a difference in the quality of the overall product. So the structural components that we're going to talk about the most, and we'll get through this with all of the wines. Complexity. How complex is it? How much is going on in each of these wines? Or is it just like a kind of a one-note Joe? I don't think that's an English phrase, but it is now, a one-note Joe. No offense to anyone named Joe. No, nothing against anyone named Joe, but a one-note Joe wine where it's just like, I get this, and that's kind of about it. So complexity is how many different flavors you're getting versus a simple wine would be something you just get 1 or 2 flavors. So that's the first structural component that we'll really, really assess with all 4 of these wines. The second is overall balance. So balance is not how many flavors are going on, that's complexity. Balance is all of those flavors. Are they really well integrated together, or is it like a seesaw and they're kind of dramatically tipping one side to the next? This often goes hand in hand. So a high quality wine will generally have more complexity and better balance. But there's plenty of times where you get a very complex wine that is not balanced. And there's some times that you get a very simple wine that is really lovely balanced. So they don't always go hand in hand, but they often do. And the best way to kind of think about the best quality wines have the most complexity and the best balance or integration. So instead of all the flavors being singular notes, they kind of come together to make one cohesive unit. So complexity and balance. Those are the 2 structural components that we'll really, really discuss with these wines. And the last one is finish. So the length of the wine. So that is how long the flavor lasts in your mouth after you swallow the wine. Now, if you have a really bad flavor of the wine and it lasts in your mouth a long time, that's not a good thing, right? So it's not just the length, but it's the quality as well. Otherwise, we'll call it an aftertaste. That always connotates something bad, something negative that we're tasting. So finish usually intimates that it's going to be a enjoyable flavor that's lingering in your mouth, and it's going to last for a long time. You can have full-bodied wines that have a very short finish. It's a bam flavor, and really, really rich flavor, and then it dies away right away. You can have very light-bodied wines that the flavor lingers for a long time. So it doesn't matter the type of wine, the overall length and quality of the finish is what we're looking for, regardless of the type of wine that it is. So complexity, balance, finish, both length and quality. Those are the three structural components that we'll analyze for all four of these wines. Now we could, and when we do blind tastings, we talk about acid and tannins and sweetness level and all this stuff to figure out more of the grape and what it's telling us. But for this class, I only want to focus on those three things. So if you're like at home, you can say it with me: complexity, balance, and finish. Those are the three things that we're going to discuss. So let's go ahead and I know everyone's already tasting, but now I'm going to start tasting with you. So 2 glasses side by side. You always want to do side by side tastings when you're doing comparative tastings, which is what this is. So let's go ahead and first of all, we always start with the color or the sight in general. And for color, instead of holding it up to the light, because I'm just going to pick up the colors from all around the room, I actually went to hold the wines on their side and look straight down through the wine. So I immediately noticed a huge difference in color. So, and in concentration. Concentration is the intensity of color that the wine has and how deeply extracted those colors are. So wine number 1 is a lot paler in concentration. Definitely has that more brickish, tawny hue to the pigment of the wine. So it looks a little bit more brownish, but it's definitely ruby red with some garnet or tawny colors, as we would call it in the wine world. Wine number 2 seems a little bit cloudier, right? There's a little bit more of a haziness going on in that wine, which indicates that it's an unfiltered wine. Again, nothing to do with quality, just a note about the wine. Definitely more of that ruby red lingering towards the more purple side of things. So quite dramatically different colors. Also the concentration of the second one, so much deeper, much darker, richer coloring. So again, this is not anything about quality yet. We'll get to quality when we discuss complexity, balance, and finish. But these are just some notes about the wine. So let's check out those legs. If you want to swirl the wine, easiest to swirl if you hold the wine stem on the bottom. You can swirl it with just a flick of the wrist, or you can set it on the table, act like you're holding a pen with it, and kind of draw circles on the table with the stem of the glass. So, sorry, I wasn't supposed to get to smelling yet, but it just smells so good. All these wines, I was really excited about featuring them. So the legs on these wines, let's do them a little bit side by side. See if we notice a difference in how quickly they fall, how defined they are, how thick they are, how much it looks like those legs spent time in the gym. I am actually, wow, number 2. Second wine is like very, very slow legs. Took a while for them to even show up. But now they're falling down pretty quickly. Maybe it's just the first time I've really swirled the glass. So not dramatically different in terms of the legs. Yeah, I don't think that there's a huge dramatic difference between the legs on either of those. If you disagree with me, if your glasses are showing you something different, please do tell in the chat room. So let's get our noses in here. So the third reason why we swirl the wine, I don't think I talked about the first. Sorry, this isn't a blind tasting class. I don't want to take too much time on these beginning parts, but the clarity. So if you swirl the wine with a light source behind you, then you're looking for how clearly the wine reflects the light through the wine. So number 1, clarity is very high. Number 2, a little bit more of that cloudiness, haziness in the wine. So it's the first reason we swirl. Second, to make sure those legs, we can see those legs. And the third is to coat the wine on the inside of the glass. Alcohol is going to evaporate just slightly. And when that alcohol evaporates, it releases all the aromatic compounds. So get your noses all the way in there and then go from 1 to 2 and then back to 1 and then back to 2. Go back and forth between these two wines a little bit and just think about the intensity of the nose, the purity of the nose, the clarity of the nose. So is it screaming at you, but it's kind of, hurts your ears? Or is it really shy and whispering? Is it singing poetry? Whatever these wines are doing to you. Ooh. Very, very different aromatics on these here. So let's see. So Tawana says legs form much faster on wine number 1 than 2. Okay, so that is what I was thinking, but I didn't know if it was just my glass. Great. Big difference in color and concentration, definitely. Chris says number 1, cherry bomb. Yes, definitely getting those cherry notes. I'm getting a lot of cherry notes in the wine number 2 too, but instead of the red cherry notes of wine number 1, a little bit more dark cherry notes, wine number 2. So overall, is any one of these a little bit more intense on the nose? Is any one of these a little bit more extroverted? Is there a big difference? Maybe one's more fruit forward and one's a little bit more earthy. Tell me what you're smelling on these two wines. Chris says number 2, cherry, but way more subtle. Yeah, I don't think the fruit on the second wine is quite as opulent. So Tawana says wine number 1 is way more in your face. Wine number 2 is a little bit more flirty, less aggressive. I like that, yeah. Hillary says wine number 1, more fruit forward. Yeah, I think there's quite a bit more like earthy, spicy notes on wine number 2 versus the cherry bomb of wine number 1. I'm also getting a lot of floral notes on wine number 1. And I don't get any of that spice box, cigar box, peppery notes that I'm getting in wine number 2 now. So Steve Hill, Sun Pop says number 2 is definitely more earthy, but neither one is in your face. I get more earthy notes, maybe mushroom and leather and saddleback. Okay, cool. I like it. Definitely that more, a little bit more on the masculine side, wine number 2. Wine number 1 seems to me a lot more feminine. But yes, Pinot Noir, while it is an aromatic grape, generally speaking, with some fruit, mushroom, spice, and floral notes. Those are very common tasty notes amongst all Pinot Noirs. It is definitely not a come out of the glass and smack you around kind of wine. They generally are more aromatic, but subtly aromatic. So white pepper on number 2, I like that. There's a lot of things that I want to cook with on wine number 2. And a lot of things that I just want to spray on myself for wine number 1. Very, very, very different noses. Let's get our mouths revved up and ready to enjoy these wines. I like to do a small sample of wine number 1, just a first impressions, and then straight go to wine number 2, small sample of that, just to get our initial first impressions of the differences of these wines. And then immediately after that, I'll go back to wine number 1, because wine number 1 is going to taste a lot different after having had wine number 2. So the order in which we do progressive tastings dramatically changes our perception of the wine. I was just stuck in traffic for an hour, so I'm not spitting these wines tonight. Oh, wow. First impressions, wine number 1. Tell me what you're getting. Wine number 1, just first impressions, initial thoughts. You just met this person at a bar and locked eyes, but that's it. Wine number 2, dramatically different. If I saw these two people at the bar, locked eyes with both of them, it'd be hard to think that they're related. Like distant cousins, very different ages, different genders. This is dramatically different wines. Let's go back to wine number 1. Yeah, and wine number 1 changed a lot just having had it right after wine number 2. Let's see what you all got in your tasting notes. Hillary says one is more fruit forward. I think we were talking about aromatics for that one. Great. Okay, Chris says a little bit more white pepper on 2. Talked about that. Mucho cherry. Yes. In blind tasting, if you remember, we did a Pinot Noir blind tasting, and cherry was like the common denominator of every single Pinot Noir. So wine number 1 is acidic. Yeah, it is definitely making my mouth water. It is so hard to talk sometimes when you're tasting really acidic wines because your mouth is watering so much. Wine number 2 is more subtle. Okay, fabulous. Wine number 1 felt acidity immediately. Yes. So acidity, some of the other things we can discuss are tannins. Do you have mouth drying sensation on either of these wines? Do you have that cotton ball effect up in your gums? So you can push the wine up into your gums, let it hang out there for a little bit. And then after you finish drinking it or spitting it, you're kind of analyzing how dried out your gums are as a result of that. Before you go on to the next wine to do that trick, make sure to rehydrate your mouth, because otherwise those tannins are just going to compound on one another, and the next wine will seem twice as tannic as it actually probably is. So got some tannins on number 2. Chris says Steve Hills higher in 2. Hillary says 2 has the dryness more so than 1. Yeah, so those are the tannins. So tannins are not only that drying sensation, but they're the bitter taste profiles in wine. So generally speaking, a wine that is really tannic also has quite a bit of like bitter phenolics in the wine. They might not be super noticeable if the wine has a lot of fruit to it too. But sometimes wines that are really tannic, if they're not great quality wines, some of these wines. So if you get those bitter notes that are really astringent, that goes into the balance of wine, remember? So the bitterness are in so if those tannins are really well integrated, then you're not going to get extreme bitterness in the wine. But if they're not integrated, sometimes, oh man, just tastes like oversteeped tea and just kind of assaults your palate, and that's not a great thing. Oh yeah, definitely getting some serious tannins on wine number 2. It is very stuck to my gums. So Tawana agrees. So I think we're all in agreement so far that those tannins are higher in wine number 2. Definitely think that's the case. Neither of these wines are sweet, but if you do want to do the sweetness test and haven't done a blind tasting with me before, sweetness test is simply just putting the wine on the tip of your tongue and focusing on whether or not you taste sweetness afterwards. So don't take a sip of the wine, just stick the tip of your tongue into the glass. Really awkward to do, especially on live camera, but that gives us information about the wine. I definitely don't get any sweetness on the tip of my tongue, but it's not, neither is it the opposite, where it tastes overly bitter or, yeah, it just tastes very neutral. I taste a little bit of fruit, but no sweetness, no actual sugar left in wine number 1. Let's try wine number 2. Definitely no sweetness on that. You get a little more of the bitter notes actually on when I do that taste. So definitely have to try that sweetness test. Yes, it is integral when you're doing blind tastings, because sometimes wines that seem very fruit forward or maybe even very floral or tropical or very ripe fruit density, they might trick you to think that they are sweet, meaning that there is actual residual sugar left in the wine from the fermentation process, when there isn't. It's bone dry, no residual sugar. So a little bit, it's just one of those things that we always have to kind of do the checks and balances of our initial impressions of the wine. So Tawana says, feeling more of an alcohol burn on number 1, despite the legs being slower on 2. Okay, great. So again, you can actually have a low alcohol content wine that the alcohol is really pronounced on the wine because it's not very well balanced or not very well integrated. So it could be still a lower alcohol content wine. Maybe the alcohol is just a little disjointed, we would call that. So there's just one factor of the wine, one thing to note about the wine. So we've kind of gone through all of the wine. Now let's talk about the 3 things that are most important, right? So complexity, how many flavors are there in each of these wines? So which of the wines is most complex? We're going to talk about complexity, talk about balance, which of the wines are most integrated, balanced, and finally, which wine has a longer and higher quality finish. So let's talk about complexity first. Which wine do you think is more complex? Now, before you answer, I want to distinguish a very key differentiation that is often confused with complexity. Often people confuse complexity with boldness or richness or intensity of fruit. They are very different. So you can have a very bold wine and it's just in your face, just really bold, kind of aggressive flavors, whatever those flavors are, really rich flavors, just very obvious flavors, and it could be still a more simple wine. You can have a very complex wines, but all of the flavors are very soft and subtle, kind of shyly whispering instead of yelling out at you. So do not confuse boldness, richness, intensity of flavor with complexity of flavor. So boldness, intensity, richness, the bigness of the wine, the big leaf flavors, those are all more descriptors that help us figure out what the grape is. They don't necessarily help us figure out the quality, and that is what we are trying to do today. So let's only talk about complexity. Which wines had more going on, even if they were softly going on? Let's see what y'all say. To do this, I kind of need to go back to the nose to see what else has opened up in the nose since we first smelled it and talked about what we were smelling. And then I need to taste it again, not thinking about acidity, not thinking about tannins, not thinking about each individual component that we just broke down in our tasting. I think about the wine as a whole. So let's taste again and see. Notice how long I am swirling the wine in my mouth. That is the only way you're going to really get the best tasting notes out of the wine, the best impressions, the truest impressions of the wine, rather than if you just take a sip, swallow it down right away. That's only going to hit the middle of your palate. That's not going to release all those esters while it's still on your mouth. You're going to get very, very small amount of the flavors of the wine if you taste it quickly and in small sips. You taste it large sip at a time, kind of swirl it around your mouth like mouthwash, let it hang out on your tongue for a while. That's when the wine really starts speaking to you. And this wine is speaking to me. Let's see here. So Steve Hill says number 2 is more complex. I had trouble getting past just the cherry on wine number 1. Okay, great. Hillary says, same, Steve. All right. Had a hard time getting past the acidic cherry on 1 to get to the rest. All right, fabulous. Tawana says, agree with Sun Pop. Wine number 1 is great, but I feel it has already revealed itself and there is more to discover with wine number 2 as it continues to open. All right, fabulous. Anybody who disagrees, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Generally speaking, Mom and Papa disagree greatly when it comes to their tasting notes. So Mom, what do you think? Which one was more complex?
I'm still working on number 2.
Okay.
Number 2.
Still working on tasting notes over here. Take your time. This is, definitely not a rush. It's a marathon to do wine tasting. It's not a sprint. You know how to say it, Tawana. I love it. I can't wait till we can all get together again and we're going to drink wine in person. Anyone who's ever attended any one of my virtual classes, you probably don't actually know the person that you're commenting on, and it'd be really great to all hang out and drink wine together and in real life and meet all of the people that we've been tasting wine along with virtually. All right. So, any contenders for wine number 1 being more complex, or is everyone in agreement with Sun Pop over here? You agree? Disagree?
I think the complexity, I see it in wine more than 2.
Okay, there we go. Some Mom has spoken. She is indeed disagreeing with Some Pup, per usual, just on wine. They have a very great relationship.
Yeah, the tannic boldness of 2 just is hard to get past.
Okay, so Some Mom says that number 1 seemed more complex to her, more layered. Wine number 2, it was hard for her to get past the tannic boldness. So just like it was hard for some people to get past the acidic cherry notes on wine number 1, Some Mom says that for wine number 2, it was hard to get past those bold tannic notes. So whose side are you on? Some Mom or Some Pup side? Do reveal yourselves, y'all. Chris says 2, probably more complex, but it can be hard to get past the tannins. So, Chris, you're very diplomatically agreeing with both of my parents here. Todd agrees with Some Mom. I'm a Some Pup. Okay, great. What I love about wine is how everyone has different palates and different appreciations, and that makes it so great. If we all had the exact same tasting notes, life would be so very boring. So I like it, waffler. All right, I won't give my thoughts on these wines on complexity, balance, or finish until the very end, probably when wines are revealed. So that's complexity. Let's talk about balance. So both of these wines, it seems from the tasting notes that you've discussed in the chat room, both seem almost slightly off balance. So wine number 1, from your tasting notes, I'm not saying that these are the facts of the wine, just from your tasting notes, that wine number 1 was a little bit more intense on the cherry, acid, and alcohol. Wine number 2 was intense on the tannins specifically. So if there's anything else you'd agree, if you think overall you have to pick one being more balanced than the other, well, I guess you don't, but for the purposes of figuring out which one is the higher priced wine, again, price is different than quality. We'll talk about that when the wines are revealed. Then this is important. So if you have thoughts on which one of these wines is more balanced than the other, do tell. So again, every time I analyze a different part of the wine, you taste it again. That's the fun part about wine tasting, is sometimes it takes lots of different sips of the wine to really get to know the wine. So we'll taste this again and just think about balance and integration. Chris said the first time anyone ever told you that about being a waffler. I think my dad's little story wanted everyone to agree with him. They're very competitive. All right, so Tawana says number 2 is more balanced despite the high tannins. Great. Chris says number 1 opens up, it seems more balanced. Great. That is why throughout the time I'm tasting a wine, I am still always swirling it, because I want to see how wines open up and change. If the wine stays static in your glass and you just take small sips, the oxygen doesn't do its job to really open up the wine. I think both of them have changed quite a bit since my first taste of the wine before the class started, just to make sure that the wines were good. Tasting number 2 again. Okay. Going back to 1. Okay, interesting. All right, anyone have any other final thoughts about which wines are more balanced? Some Pup, did you say? All right. You're back in Some Pup's good graces, Chris. Wine number 1 opens up, it seems more balanced. All right. So I'm going to guess then that Mom might say that wine number 2 is more balanced.
No, I think number 1 is more of a soft harmony of flavors.
Fabulous. So Some Mom and Some Pup are agreeing that wine number 1 is a little bit more balanced on this. So a house at odds over here. I love it. I love it. Yes, it makes it fun. Just like anything, we learn from each other. And so if someone's going to challenge your ideas of something, then it makes you either rethink it and then decide to change your mind, or decide to really cement and like kind of double down and like, no, I after being challenged, I do agree with my initial thoughts. So it is really good to be challenged in our thinking, whether our thinking is about tasting notes or about anything else in life. It's always good to kind of have someone challenge our thoughts. Otherwise, we just live in a vacuum and we just hear ourselves speak to each other. So that's very boring. All right, so balance seems like we're about 50-50 on both complexity and balance on both of these wines. Interesting. This might be harder than I thought. Let's now taste the wine again. Focus specifically just on the length of the finish. So almost like I like to even count down seconds until I'm not really tasting the wine anymore. So length and quality. So sometimes, again, you can have that length of finish, but it wasn't really great tasting. And sometimes you can have a really beautiful taste that dies down really fast. So talk to me in the chat room about length and quality of the finish of both of these wines. And again, just make sure no one is confusing length with intensity. So again, intensity, boldness, the bigness, the richness of a wine has nothing to do with balance, complexity, or finish. So even soft, light wines can be incredibly balanced, incredibly complex, and have long finishes.
It's hard to separate the finish from the tannin effect.
Great. So Mom was saying it's hard to separate the finish from the overall tannic effect. So tannins are part of the length of a finish, right? Because the longer you're still kind of getting that tannic sensation, that is part of the length of the actual finish. But to me, if that's the only thing that I'm getting, then the quality of that finish is not very high. If I'm just getting tannins and none of the flavor of the wine. That goes back to balance also, right? The tannins are kind of overpowering everything. So yes, you kind of have to break down the two components, length and quality. Sampap, Seapill says, I keep getting flavors on too. Like new and different flavors, it continues to develop for you?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So that's continuing to develop. So the complexity is quite high for you then on this wine.
And there was the first piece of that.
Oh, sorry. At first, I thought the finish was longer on 1, primarily because of the alcohol burn. But then I decided that the finish on 2 is longer and more complex because he continues to get more flavors. Okay, great. Sorry, I missed that first part. Tawana, how do you measure finish? So again, length and quality. Length can be a very specific, I mean, you can almost just count down the seconds until you're not really tasting that wine anymore. So a short finish would be, almost like within 2 seconds, the wine flavor is gone. A medium finish, it might linger for, 5 to 10 seconds. After 15 seconds, real seconds, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi kind of thing. If it lasts longer than that, then that's a very long finish, but it's also quality. So if I'm just getting bitter, astringent, terrible things, then that's a long finish. That's a terrible one. It's a long aftertaste. So great question. There is a very scientific approach to that. Just how many seconds do you continue to taste it? And it's also kind of up to your sensitivity as well. So if you have kind of a very, very sensitive palate, then you could continue to taste the flavors of the wine for much longer than other people. So you have to go on, when you're deciding whether it's a long, short, or medium, long, medium, or short finish, you have to go on your own sense of standards of what your standards of short finish are. Because if you have a really sensitive palate, someone's short finish could actually last for about 10 seconds for you. So figure out your calibration of how long you generally taste wine and have the finish linger. And part of that is just a lot of practice. So every time you taste wine, concentrating on the finish. Once you learn your calibration, then you can kind of analyze the length of finish quite easily. So other thoughts here. Anyone have other thoughts on the finish of this wine? So Hillary says 1 lingers so much longer. 2 is just the tannins that stick around. So quite different reactions to both of these wines. And by the way, congratulations on us getting to this point of the wine and no one in the comments saying which wine you like more than the other. So thank you for listening to those instructions. That is the most important part of blind tasting, is putting your own opinion of the wine to the side until the very end. All right, so Tawana says, thank you, that's very helpful. Awesome. Sometimes I don't know if I go on rabbit trails and they are not helpful at all. So great. Agree with Steve. Acid stays with you on 1. So acid stays with us on 1, tannin stays with us on 2. Talk about the quality of the finish then. If both of them kind of linger, but they seem a little off balanced on which one is kind of dominating the flavor, does either one of them seem just like a higher quality of a finish, a more purity of flavor, a more pleasurable flavor? Let's see. Maybe changing my mind, getting some fruits there on number 1. I like it. Okay. Some of them says 2 is a longer finish but lower quality. See, it is not so cut and dry, right? And if it were, then no one would need to take classes from a sommelier, and I would be out of a job. So I'm glad that it's not so cut and dry. I appreciate the complexity of wine tasting. Number 2 is a longer finish. Tawana says, I get all the alcohol and acid on number 1 after a few seconds. 2 seems to have more flavors. All right. So
How many people are being influenced by France versus Oregon?
anyone being in, oh, okay. So let's talk about some of the other things. When we get to some of the other things that we're going to ignore, not pay attention to when we come to our final decision. 1, Samam just brought up, the place of origin. Is that influencing our impressions of the wine at all? So in terms of quality, if you, obviously I didn't obscure these labels because it's not a true blind tasting. You cannot be influenced on the place of origin. There are extremely high quality wines coming out of New Zealand, South Africa, Canada, all over the world, in places that you might not necessarily associate with the highest quality wines of the world. There's also really low quality wines coming from the most classic places of the world. When you think of California or France, Spain, Italy, any of the very classic high quality regions, places of origin, there's all ranges of quality levels of wine coming from those. So let's definitely not let the place of origin trick us to thinking one way or the other. Another thing that we cannot do anymore, we used to be able to do, but we cannot do, is what type of closure the wine has. So from Oregon, we have a wine that was sealed with a natural cork. From France, we have wine that was sealed with a screw cap or Stelvin enclosure, if you're gonna be really posh about it. That does not tell us that the screw cap wine is cheap. Notice that both of the Cabernets are sealed with a screw cap. So, and obviously one of them is a higher end wine. Screw caps are now much more sustainable for wineries to use, especially in wines that they're not necessarily thinking that people are going to age for 20, 30 years. Screw caps allow for more consistency of flavor. Whenever you have cork, you have the possibility that a wine could be corked, meaning TCA has infected the aromatic profiles of the wine. It comes from natural cork, literally absorbing chloride, volatile chloride, and creating a new chemical component called TCA, or trichloroacetanol. And that is the smell of really dank basement, wet dog, moldy newspaper, wet cardboard. So anytime you have a natural cork, you increase the odds of that happening. That's another discussion, another video on another time about what corked wine really is and how it happens, why it used to happen more and not anymore. But just to know that cork is always going to increase the odds that you're going to have bottle variation. One bottle is going to taste slightly different than another. Whenever you have a screw cap, there's like a 99.9% chance that all of your wines are going to taste the exact same unless the bottle got knocked and that screw cap got dinged and opened, which will be very obvious. So you could just see from the outside if the wine is going to have faults on that. So that's another thing that you cannot decide on, think about when you're thinking about quality. So place of origin, whether or not it's sealed with cork or a screw cap or glass top or any other closure, and label art. These days, people in their marketing majors, everyone's doing everything under the sun. People who are making cheap wine are getting their label makers to make very expensive looking labels. People who are making really expensive wine are trying to be more approachable, so they're making comic art on the outside of their labels. So all of that can't really affect our thoughts either. So the superficial things, the place of origin, or specific flavors. So if you hate the flavor of tobacco and you get on that one wine, you can't decide that that wine isn't good quality, because quality has nothing to do with whether or not we like it. So those are the things we're not going to pay attention to. Remember the things we're going to pay attention to for this class specifically. You're going to hate me at the end of this for saying these three things so often, but complexity, balance, and finish. All right, so let me ask you then, which wine you think is higher quality? Again, I'm still not asking you which one you like the most, but I'm asking you which wine you think is higher quality. Higher quality for the purposes of this class specifically means higher price point. That is not always the case, as you well know. How many times have you paid $150 for a shirt, and then after you wash it once, it's threadbare and ripped, and so the quality did not match the price? Quality, again, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to like the wine more. So those two fallacies of thinking that they're equal, we need to stay away from that. So both of these things, I definitely think that the quality of the wine matches the price of the wine. I picked them out specifically for that purpose. So wine number one, Tawana says, is the higher quality wine. Tell me which one you think is the higher quality one so I don't get confused. And let me see if there's any other comments that I missed.
Quality.
So Tawana says number two is a longer finish. Oh wait, we talked about that. Number three, I love 3 screw caps on these. Definitely going to be drinking a lot in the next couple days. I'm so sorry. I need to do a video on the screw cap Coravin enclosures to discuss whether or not it's worth using them. I need to actually practice it a few times before I do that. But I apologize for those of you who normally use Coravins. For this class, there are 3 screw cap wines. I should warn people in advance of that next time. So Todd says number 1 is higher quality wine. Hillary says number 2. House at odds, I love it. Tawana says wine number 1. Rebecca says wine number 2. Some mom says 1. Some pop says 2. All right, so again, we're about 50-50 on this. Chris and Mary, not a house divided. We're both going for wine number 1, okay? And we're 50-50 between 1 and 2. All right, fabulous. This is really this is an amazing example of how the differences of flavor profile of our own personal preferences really do shape how we think about quality of wine.
Mm-hmm.
Really awesome. All right, so one of these wines is about $30. One of these wines is $15, so literally double. The $15 wine is indeed from France. So if you thought that wine number 2 was the higher quality wine, this wine is available to buy by the case. Because $15 for a bottle of Pinot Noir, first of all, that's delicious, is kind of unheard of. Pinot Noir is a very finicky grape. It is very disease prone, so it takes a lot of effort to grow Pinot Noir. So generally, the more effort that goes into making a product, the higher price it is. It is very difficult for me to find any $15 retail Pinot Noirs that are super delicious and drinkable. I found this one And I was like, cha-ching, this is amazing. So to me, this definitely over delivers for the price of 15, but I think it's appropriately priced. I don't think it's way under over price point. Languedoc is the region right on the Mediterranean coast of France. And generally speaking, they make 2 types of wine. Well, all types in terms of white, red, sparkling, dessert wine, rosé, everything under the sun. But they make really amazing everyday drinking table wine. And then you kind of skip all of the middle class wines and you get to incredible wines that you could age for decades that are very expensive. So those are the 2 types of wines they make. Generally, most of what they make is under $20 and like the best value wines you can find coming out of France. I always look for wines from Languedoc when I'm going to a retail shop that I don't know all of the wines. I'm like, if I only want to spend 20 or under, I always know I'm going to get a really amazing value from that area in France. So in Oregon, we have the Vigio Hamana Cellars wine from Ribbon Ridge. That is a specific sub-appellation within the Willamette Valley of Oregon. So here's one way on a label specifically that you can generally tell you're going to be spending a little bit more money, or you might have a little bit of a higher quality wine. And that is the more specific the region is on the wine label. Generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, the higher the quality of the wine it is. So that's why if you just see a wine called California Pinot Noir, they're usually blending from vineyards from all over the place, making a more simple wine, a little bit more approachable, both in terms of flavor and price point. Versus if you have a single vineyard within this sub-appellation, within this one side of the mountain, within Napa Valley, within California, chances are that wine's going to be not only more expensive, but a little bit higher quality because that wine was so singularly unique and special that they didn't want to blend it with anything else. So that's just one clue on a label. Remember how we talked about label art not affecting whether or not you can tell if a wine's high quality. But one way you can tell is how specific the app on that. Congratulations, everybody, because whether or not you guessed the higher price one or not, I almost think that the people who guessed the French one was higher quality win the most, because isn't it amazing to think that the wine over-delivered that much? So really exciting. Now I'm going to finally ask, did you like either of these Pinot Noirs? And if so, which one was your favorite? I personally thought that the Pinot Noir from Oregon was outstanding. Again, I love the over-delivering flavors of the wine from France. I thought it was bold, it was zesty, but it was a little bit more rustic. To me, the flavors were a little bit more disjointed in a really rustically pleasant way. But the wine from Oregon, to me, yes, it was more acidic. I generally like more acidic wines. That's just my personal preference. And it was just, oh man, it was so poetic to me. It was so sultry, that wine was. So quite different than like the rustic, fun, kind of flamboyant Pinot Noir in France. This one was definitely that brooding person in the corner of a bar, hand rolling their own cigarettes, kind of like brooding, staring off into space. That wine, but in a really poetic way. So to me, I enjoyed the wine from Oregon the most, but I enjoyed them both. And actually, both of these wines will be available in my 6-packs. From here on out. I wanted to feature 2 very different styles of Pinot Noir. So they will be regularly available from here on out. So you can, get that $15 Pinot Noir all you like. All right, let's see. Steve, I know I won. I like it, yes. Always the competitive person that I got my competitive genes from. Chris says, like number 1 better. Okay, awesome. So Chris, you and me and Mary, we're gonna drink a bottle of this one day when we can all get together again. Todd enjoyed 1. I was mad on either. Okay, some people just don't like Pinot Noir. It's just not their favorite grape. I did a very drastic different end of the spectrum, doing Pinot Noir and Cabernet for these wines. So, all right. Chris says we don't glow, Steve. Yes, we do in the Hill House. Not only that, but we'll hold the scorecard over each other's heads for years too. Remember that one game of beach volleyball that you lost? Yeah. So that's my family, but it's fun. That's what happens when you have 7 children and you're all fighting over food for the dinner table. It creates that atmosphere. So, all right, let's get into some Cabernets. Pour 2 glasses of both the Hyatt Cabernet. This is going to be wine number 1. So wine on the left is the Hyatt Cabernet. That's how it's pronounced. The wine number 2 on the right is called Chenayan. So the S is a Celtic word. So the S is like an SH. So Chenayan is how that's pronounced. So Hyatt and Chenayan. I called this wine the Sienna wine for forever because I just dyslexically put the A at the end instead of in the middle. But it's Chenayan. And both of these wines are from Washington State. So rather doing across the world, I thought that might be an easy way to start. But now I'm going to make us work a little bit harder. Both of these wines are from Washington State. Both of these wines are 100% Cabernet, or at least 95% Cabernet. Get a full glass or so of each of these wines. We're going to go through the site of these wines and pretty quickly. Let me know if you see any dramatic differences in color, legs, clarity of the wines. And then we're going to get straight into the nose. I see a slight more brownish coloring on the wine number 2, a little bit more purple coloring, but definitely red for both of these wines. Just leaning a little bit more towards brown for the Chenayan, leaning a little bit more towards purple for the Hyatt. Any big differences on legs? I am getting better at swirling with my left hand. All this swirling with my left hand on live camera for the whole internet makes me practice a little bit more. Pretty similar. I say slightly more defined legs on wine number 2, but we're talking slight differences. I am most concerned about the differences of smell on these wines for the purposes of this tasting. Ooh. Ooh. All right. This is going to be fun. Not that the first round wasn't. All right, so was close, but 2 has a little bit thicker legs. Wine number 2 has hazier too. Okay. Tell me what you're smelling. Is either one of these wines, first off, more intense on the aromatic profile than the other? Oh, great. On what?
Number 2, more intense on the nose.
All right. We have a new record tonight, February 6th, Saturday of the year 2021. Some mom and some pop have agreed that wine number 2 is more intense on the nose. By the way, everyone in the chat room is saying wine number 1 is more intense. All right. Tawana says it's more intense, but not by much. Chris and Mary, number 1, a little more campfire smoke. I love that call. I literally feel like I'm camping, and I'm so glad I'm not. I hate camping. Number 2, fresh up with some spice that we just can't name yet. Love this. The spice notes, the like baking spice notes that come out of Washington State wines, to me are so distinct and different than wine coming from anywhere else in the whole world. And specifically, Washington State reds, and across the board, many of the reds. I'm not sure exactly why that is. Still, science is out on why terroir makes such a difference in the flavor of our wine. We still don't know all the answers, which is a romantic thing to not have the answers. But yes, I love, it's almost reversed to me. I'm getting more masculine notes on wine number 1, more feminine notes on wine number 2 versus the round of Pinot Noir. So that was opposite of that. Number 2 is a little bit more intense on the fruitier notes. Rare agreement with the misses. I'm getting some funk in wine number 1. There is some. So my sister took my nephews to play behind the church where I guess they're doing some garden reconstruction and stuff. They thought the 4 boys, all under the age of 8, were playing in a pile of mulch for a while. Didn't come to find out what it really was until it was too late. It was a pile of manure that was supposed to be spread throughout the garden. So then they had to get in the car afterwards. And so I was going over to her house and she was cleaning out the car because all of the manure, they tried to bang out from the shoes, but there's bits of an unpleasant way, oddly enough. I don't mind that smell in wine as long as it's a little bit more reserved, not over the top. But I am getting a little bit of old manure that you will use to spread in your garden for compost. All right, so number 2 has some vanilla on it. Okay, great, I love it. Is that the spice that you finally named, or is there still something else out there, Chris? Do tell. Tawana, am I the only one getting some clove or cardamom on number 2? No, absolutely not. So we've got vanilla, clove, and cardamom. I get cocoa powder on both of these wines. And that's the cocoa powder and those like baking spices, but specifically, because you get baking spices from a lot of wines, especially if they're aged in oak and especially if it's French oak. But specifically cocoa powder, I get in every single Washington State red. Like not chocolate you want to eat, but chocolate you're gonna bake with, baking chocolate. I definitely get on both of these, but I also agree on the clove, cardamom, vanilla bean, and vanilla bean extract kind of thing. Both of those. You are so welcome for that manure story. I knew I knew everyone was waiting for a story about some manure tonight. So maybe a little bit of caramelization on my number 2, a little bit of those tertiary notes. So a little bit of what wine starts to show when it has a little bit more age on it. With at 6, 4, oh, sorry, I can't do math. About 5 years now, age on this wine. It's a little young to show like age on the wine, but if they do some oxidative style winemaking practices, then it would increase or accelerate the rate, which we're gonna smell that caramelization that comes from oxygen changing the flavor profiles of the wine. Whether it's over time in the bottle for many years, or whether it's done in the winery because the wine was aged in oak and kind of purposefully allowed to integrate with oxygen more. All right, so both of these are state-made wines, so they're using fruit from their own vineyards. Both of these, excellent winemakers, both of these from Washington State, only 1 year difference. So let's get this wine in our mouth and figure out if there's a big difference in the taste of either of these wines. Again, we're gonna talk about the components of the wine, acid and tannin and sweetness and alcohol level. But our primary focus is, everyone say along with me, complexity, balance, finish. Let's see. That first sip, that kind of first impressions, wine number 1. Now I'm going to go direct to wine number 2. Wildly different. And then back to 1 again. One has changed so much in just that short change of progression and tasting. Hi, Rick. Great to see y'all tuning in late. No worries whatsoever. We just started with the Cabernet, Rick, and we were just started tasting it. So we talked about smell a little bit, but if you want to go ahead and pour both of the Cabernets, we're doing Hyatt in wine number 1, so glass on the left. We are doing the Chenin in the glass on the right, so wine number 2. I'm recommending pouring quite a bit of wine in this because there's going to be so much going back and forth. And you can always open up the 2 Pinot Noirs and tune into the recording of the first half of the class. But to recap, can anyone put in the chat room the 3 things that we focus on the most when discussing quality of the wine? Anyone?
It's just that
Yes, Chris, fabulous. Complexity, balance, finish. Yes. Person, man, woman, character. Yes. You know, repetition is key because I know I'm serving everyone alcohol, and I feel like sometimes if I don't repeat myself 12 times, then the next day there's just vague memories. But I don't think anyone's going to forget the three quality factors. So thank you so much for Chris for that. All right, so let's talk about. So we talked about overall impressions. Let's talk about anything that jumps out on you. So Tawana's talking about alcohol burn. So she's getting a little bit more intense of the alcohol sensation on wine number 1. Is there any wine of these, the Hyatt or the Chenin, that's more acidic? Any one of these that's giving us more of that mouth-watering effect?
2.
Okay, 1, let's try 2. Wow, yeah, quite different. 2 more tannic, but complexity slightly higher on the first taste test of the first wine, or the first taste test of wine number 2?
On the first taste of both of them, I thought 2 was a higher complexity, but very much more tannic. So lower balance. Balance.
So Papa is saying, some Pop is saying, Steve Hill is saying that wine number 2, a little bit lower on the balance level because the tannins are really high, but definitely higher on the complexity level. So interesting. By the way, I'm just going to throw this out there. Tomorrow, the first person to text me or email me the 3 components of the wine tasting to analyze quality will win some sort of prize. I'll figure it out. It's probably going to be like some, pimento cheese or something like that. So, or French onion dip, or $5 off the next class pack, or something like that. The first person to remember to text or email me tomorrow, can't be tonight, gotta have slept on it and still remember, then they will win a prize. Let's see if it works. All right, so Tawana says, wine number 1 more acidic, but wine number 2 high tannins. So, all right, some Mom and Tawana are in disagreement tonight. Oddly, y'all are the ones generally more in line. Interesting. Mercury is in retrograde. Actually, I don't know if that's true, and I don't really know what it means, but I just say that when things don't make sense in life. So, let's see. So, let's talk about the so acidity. We've got conflicting notes on which wine has more acid. Now, if you're new to the blind tasting world and you haven't attended my classes, I will go over the acid test for everyone. If you know this by heart, just tune out for a bit. You're going to take a sip of the wine. You're going to swirl it around your mouth like mouthwash. After you swallow the wine, you're going to lean back. You're going to touch the tip of your tongue to the roof of your mouth, right behind your front teeth, and breathe in. That's going to suck the air to the sides of your jaw, like right where your jaw meets. That's where the most of your salivary glands are. So that's going to concentrate the airflow right to your salivary glands, and it's going to make them pucker up and salivate. So the more you have that mouth watering effect and the pucker effect, the higher levels of acid. If you do that and don't really get much pucker, it does not make you feel like you just ate a lemon, then lean forward and feel the drool effect. And if you need a napkin right away because your mouth is watering so much, higher levels of acidity. So some people are more sensitive to the pucker effect of acid. Some people are more sensitive to the salivation effect of acid. It could be different for every person. So do that for both of these wines. Remember to hydrate in between the wines. And let's see, which one is really, since there's some conflicting notes on this, which one has higher acid? That's why you have to swallow the wine first. Never forget the blind tasting, the event that I did. It was an in-person event. And someone tried to have the wine still in their mouth, lean forward, breathe in through their mouth, and they just choked and spewed the wine everywhere. So now I have to reiterate for my own liability purposes that you have to swallow the wine first before you do this. Yeah, okay. I get a dramatically different levels of acidity for between 1 and 2. Let's see, number 1's, Sun Pop says number 1 more acidic. This a little briny, like olivey, like
Even
olives.
Salt, I'm not even sure.
Okay.
I just get salty.
Okay. See, Rick Morrison says 1 seems more acidic. Everyone is saying 1 more acidic, except for some. Mom says 2 is more acidic. I was waiting for someone to disagree. I would tend to think that number 2 is more acidic. So I would agree. I would agree with some, Mom.
Similar tannins. I find the tannins very similar.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about tannins then. Are either of these wines more tannically intense? Sometimes for tannins, I get the same level of intensity of tannins, but there's a different texture. So some wines have a very fine-grained tannins. They're very silky tannins, but they're bold. And then some wines have bold and rough tannins that almost just like hurt your mouth afterwards. So I'm going to do the tannin test for both of these wines and see from there. Mom, who would have thought that when I was a teenager, I'd be in my mid-30s sitting down agreeing with you about everything.
Or anything.
Or anything. It's just like a good wine ages, so does a mother-daughter relationship. Not to say that we don't have a good relationship. All right, sorry. Back on track. Man, my mouth is still dried out from wine number 1. Those tannins were, to me, rough, definitely not silky, and bold. So Tawana says more of like a black olive brine as opposed to green olive. Let's see what you're talking about. Okay, awesome. Getting back onto that brine conversation. Anyone else get any briny, olivey, tapenade, salty component in wine number 2? Yeah, both have pretty intense tannins, right? Which is natural for Cabernet. Cabernet, the grape itself. Tannins come from the skin of the grape, the seed of the grape, the stem, everything that's not the actual fruit, the juicy part that we like to eat. And it also comes from the oak that the wine was aged in. Both of these wines are aged in oak. We've got strictly French oak for Chenin. I believe it is French and American for Hyatt. I'm getting tannins definitely on both of those because Cabernet, the grape itself, has more tannins naturally in the skin and seed than many other grapes. So I'm getting tannins from the oak itself and the grape itself. To me, they're both bold tannins. I am getting a silkier tannin effect wine number 2. The Chenin to me is a little bit silkier. But both are bold, and so it kind of just depends on what kind of tannins that you're used to, what kind of tannins you like, and also what your food pairing is too. So the fattier the foods, the more I want those bold kind of rustic tannins. The lower fat content, so filet mignon would be great with the Chenin probably. A ribeye would be great with the Hyatt where it needs a little bit something to kind of hold on to. So, hi Ryan, just tuning in super late. Cheers to you from Maryland. By the way, Ryan, I just found out some really amazing Balkan wines, none from Croatia, unfortunately, but some wines from Serbia and Macedonia that I will be featuring soon. So I look forward to your comments on those Facebook posts as soon as I release those. So, so Chris says both have pretty good amount of tannins, but number 2 has more. Okay, so a little bit different texture, but both have high tannins. So let's talk about the actual overall finish. And the body of these wines. So is either one of these wines more full-bodied than the other? And body is basically how heavy the wine sits on your tongue, how much it weighs you down. Can be in a good way, can be in a bad way. That's more your personal preference, which remember, we're not going to discuss until the very end. So, anyone have an idea of which wine of these has a fuller body? The Pinot Noirs, I definitely think the French wine had a much fuller body to it. It definitely sat heavier on our mouth. But these two wines are a little bit more similar in style, so it's a little bit harder. We're kind of splitting hairs with these two wines. So Tawana says, probably say splitting hairs. We have we've been tasting wine together for a long time. We have the same vocabulary now. But 2 might be slightly higher bodied. Okay, I would agree. I think 2 is slightly fuller bodied. They're very close, I would say. All right, before we get into the final comparison, are there any more thoughts that you have on the aromatic differences of these two wines? Since you just jumped in on these wines, and I'm assuming you just opened up the wines, so I'm curious how your wines are smelling right now, just right, pop and pour, versus mine have been in the glass for, about an hour now. So tell me what you think about the smell of these wines. And now we're going to go into complexity, balance, and finish. All right, so Mom and Pop agree that 1 is higher body, but not much though. Okay, all right, so we've got some differentiation here, and that's totally fine. I think we're close enough that I don't think that there is a real wrong answer there on that one. Any other final notes on what we're smelling or getting out of these wines before we go into the final 3? Complexity, balance, finish. CBF. I'm gonna now, I'm still getting some of that funk, but like it's very well integrated into the wine. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. And that chocolate, ooh. All right, let's talk about complexity then. Let us talk about which wine you think is more complex. So how many flavors are going on? Does number 1 have way more flavoral? Yeah, sure. Flavoral components to it. Or does number 2 have more flavoral components to it? This is what happens when I'm drinking wine during the tasting and not spitting it.
And is this always a reflection of the palate, not the nose?
Great question. Someone says, is complexity a reflection of just the palate or the nose? And the answer is yes. So taste is mostly, the nose affects the taste affects the nose. All of those things are very symbiotic. So you cannot discuss one without the other. Unless you were born without a sense of the smell, or you have, a sinus infection or something like that, then taste is the nose, and nose is they're both so symbiotic that you can't discuss one without the other. So let's see here. So Tawana says complexity of number 2 is higher. I feel like every time I go back to it, I pick it up new aromas and flavors. Yeah, I would
It's softened.
It's true. There's so much more going on. I'm still kind of getting the same thing I smelled at the beginning on wine number 1. I still love the smell of it, but it didn't develop to me as much while opening as wine number 2 did. So Some Pop says number 2 is more complex. Beth thinks number 2 is more complex. Mom even agreed. Okay, so we might be anyone want to raise their hand for wine number 1? Remember, I'm always looking for disagreement. I'm always looking for someone to just be bold enough to speak your mind, not disagree for the sake of disagreement. But if everyone's agreeing, then I start to question whether or not it's like the Emperor's New Clothes effect, where someone's saying something and you feel scared to have a different opinion. I always encourage people to have different opinions. If you have it, speak your mind. Let's see. So, sorry, but no, we vote number 2. All right, so no disagreement yet. Maybe 4 glasses of wine. Okay.
I was answering twice.
Oh, gotcha. About all of the agreement happening on. All right. Let's talk about balance then. either one of these wines more balanced? We talked about weight difference of tannin level, acidity level, not weight difference of tannin, similar tannin, but weight difference of acidity, different levels of complexity. Is either one of these wines more balanced in their overall flavor profile? Some mom says 2. She said it with like a 2, just like that. I gotta mimic that for the next time. Some mom, you just gotta be on camera with me. If you're wondering, you just gotta taste again. If you're like, I don't know, which one is it? Taste again. Which one seems more harmonious? And if one seems like one person of that a cappella group is singing off key, then that's the one that's not balanced, versus everyone's kind of coming together and singing the same tune. So that's another, I guess, analogy or metaphor of what balance means in wine.
The farmer on wine one is singing off key. The farmer who manages the barnyard.
So some mom says the farmer of the a cappella group of wine number 1 is singing off key, and thus that hint of manure in it. So interesting. All right. So Tawana says, I think wine number 1 is more balanced. Awesome. She's okay. And Chris Bonzek says wine number 2 is more balanced. So all right, we've got some disagreement. I love it. I love it. I think they're just quite different wines. It's surprising how different they are. It really is.
Yeah. I
need to pour myself a little bit more of each. Now that we've talked about balance, we're going to talk about the last thing, which is finish. Then after we reveal the wines, I'm going to talk about a little bit at the very end about just what goes into making a wine more costly. What makes someone price their wine at $100 versus $50, or $50 instead of $25. So I will talk a little bit about the science of pricing at the end of this after the reveal. But finally, the finish. Which of the wines had not just a longer finish, but a higher quality finish? Tawana says, barnyard doesn't throw me off, so I may not be as influenced by the farmer. Okay, it's true. Farmers are very polarizing in a cappella groups. I'm going to use this analogy a lot. So that barnyard component of wine comes from what's called Brettanomyces. Brettanomyces, or Brett for short, is a fungus that grows in, generally speaking, humid, dank cellars. Perfect conditions for not only aging your wine, but also having this fungus that grows usually in like wooden rafters. This fungus doesn't grow in the wine. Don't worry, you're not drinking fungus. But it does affect the aromatic component of what's happening in the air. So what is happening with Brettanomyces is, I need to research a little bit more of the chemistry of it. But I'm going to get back to you. I'm going to do a whole nother video on Brettanomyces and cork taint. So TCA, when a wine is corked, those two faults of a wine that no matter what, corked wine is always bad. Brettanomyces is a personal preference kind of thing. You love Brettanomyces, or you hate it, or you like it in small amounts maybe, but not over the top. But it is a very polarizing flavor component of wine. That's usually just more of an aromatic than a textural or flavor component. It doesn't taste like manure. It's just going to smell a little bit like a barnyard. So that's Brettanomyces. Stay tuned for all these upcoming videos about Coravins, Cru Caps, and Brettanomyces and corked wines. All right, so let's see here. Steve Hill says, I'm the one that's finished right now. I should have spit more. All right, let's see if he can remember the 3 components of wine tasting that we've been talking about all night. Rick Morrison, wine number 1, more medium-bodied, but more balanced. Okay, wine number 2 has a heavier body, but bigger with more alcohol. We think wine number 1 is more balanced. Fabulous. Great analysis right there. Brett can be interesting in wine. It really can. I love Brett in wine, but I didn't always. It's an acquired taste. The first time I ever smelled Brettanomyces in wine, I was at a wine tasting for Rioja Wines. I just turned 21. So the wines that I was exposed to were definitely not like austere French wines with Brettanomyces. And I was with my then boyfriend. He loved this one wine from Rioja that was just laden with Brettanomyces, just straight up like smelled like horse shit. And he loved it, and I hated it. And I thought, there's no way in this world I can keep dating someone who likes the smell of that in their wine. So we got into one of the biggest fights we ever got into over the smell of this one wine and whether or not it was a good thing or not. All these years later, definitely not with him anymore, not just for that. But now I look back on that and laugh, and I think, I hated it so much, and I judged him for liking it, and now I really enjoy it in wine. So don't judge anyone else for liking it. It's the moral of the story, because you never know. You might come around and like it too, or you could not. Just a personal preference. Joanna Wynn, this Texas country girl feels at home with the Brett. I like it. Chris says both. Both of you are thinking that number 2, much nicer and a little bit longer finish on number 2. So both length and quality were longer and higher on wine number 2, the Chenin. Oh man, Rick, next time invite me over and you're gonna open up an 83 Beaucastel Chateauneuf du Pape. Samam says that the farmer in one has cleaned up well and opened up more. All right. So we've talked about complexity, balance, and finish. One of these wines is closer to the $40 price range. One of these wines is right at $15. Which wine do you think is $40? You tell me. So, sometimes when you're analyzing which wine is a higher quality, it's easier to pick that, but then it might be harder to pick that, but when you actually realize what the difference of the price point is, it's sometimes all of a sudden like, oh man, that's a dramatic difference, and I don't think these wines were that dramatically different. So this should be quite interesting. So which wine do you think was the $40 one? Number 2, Tawana says. Rick Morrison. Number 2 has the longer and more interesting finish. You also thought that number 1, though, was more balanced. So interesting. Hillary Vincent, number 2, higher dollars. Rebecca says wine number 2. All right. Anyone want to say wine number 1 is the higher price point wine? Sampap?
We both agreed 2, but it may just be because we like it better.
Okay. Oh, Sampap did the thing that I said was not to be allowed. He says he picked number 2 as the higher price point, but it might just be because he likes it more. All right. Lorraine and Crew says unanimous. 2 is more expensive. Okay. All right. Before I reveal it, which wine do you like more? Like, which wine would you want to have a glass of after this class? If you only can pick one, which you can't, you don't have to do that because you have more in your bottle, hopefully. If not, I can bring you more to your house tomorrow. If you can only have one glass of either of these wines tonight after this class, is it going to be wine number 1 or wine number 2? Remember, this is a different question than which wine is more expensive. So let's see. Tawana says all of 4. You mean like all 4 glasses? You would like another glass of those? I agree.
think she's asking the question. Which do you mean if you were picking the one glass?
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So wine number 2, Tawana says. Okay. Chris says wine number 1. Mary says wine number 2. All right. I like it. Still 2. Okay. So some across the board, some not much variation there on this. All right, I will make the final reveal of which wine was $40 that you can also order a case of. And it is Chenin. Woohoo! So let's talk about real quick. The Hyatt here is from Rattlesnake Hills. Rattlesnake Hills is a smaller appellation within Columbia Valley. The Chenin is just Columbia Valley. So at the very beginning, with the first 2 rounds, I talked about the Pinot Noir coming from Ribbon Ridge, which is a smaller region within the Willamette Valley. And generally speaking, the smaller the region that the wine comes from, you can almost directly correlate a higher price point, the smaller the region that the wine comes from, that it is labeled as such. It is not like that, strictly because Columbia Valley is massive, and there are really high quality vineyards throughout the Columbia Valley that encompasses about 98% of the vineyards of the wine produced in Washington State. So within Columbia Valley is where you have most of the other sub-regions. There's the Puget Sound, like near Seattle, on the very rainy side, generally not considered to be making the highest quality of wines coming from Washington, versus on the desert side of Washington. And so within that, you have a lot of Columbia Valley that has really premium vineyards that don't have yet their own sub-region designation. And that's because Washington State is kind of brand new to the wine world. They've only been making premium wines since the late 80s, versus California kind of started in the early 60s. So we're about 25 years behind in designating the quality regions within the Washington State. So within Washington State, if it's Columbia Valley, don't look down on it because it doesn't have a smaller AVA, because they just haven't designated all of these sub-regions yet. So definitely don't look down on that. I hope you enjoyed all 4 of these wines. If you want to stick around a little bit longer, I'm going to talk about what goes into some of the pricing factors of wine, why wine costs more, sometimes dramatically so. But that was the tasting portion of the wine. And if you had a favorite of all 4 of these, both the Pinot Noirs and the Cabernets, please do tell. If there's one wine that surprised you the most, what, the wine from France was only $15 and I loved it so much, please also do tell me that. I'm really curious. So a couple of the factors that go into the pricing of wine. The first and foremost that goes into the pricing of especially the most expensive wines is just economics 101, supply and demand. So if I am very famous, not the person that's doing a YouTube live channel with 9 viewers, but the person who, like, if I go on like paparazzi or following me everywhere, it's very different, right? Then anything that I put my hands on, the value goes up. So that's how sometimes these cult winemakers in and gave like a basic consultant, then that winery is going to tell everyone, oh, Kira Hill is the consulting winemaker on this. And then all of a sudden the price will go up on that because it's a cult person that everyone's following. So there's that cult personality involved in not just the winemaker, but sometimes the chateau itself or the winery itself or the bodega itself, whatever you want to call it, wherever it's from, that influences the price, just the personality that everyone wants to be associated with it. There's a reason that Nike shoes cost more than other types of shoes. And a lot of times it's not necessarily the quality, but that cult brand that's associated with it. So that's part of it. The other part is, if there's a very short supply on it, say Jordans, they're only going to release, I don't know why I'm talking about sneakers. I'm not a sneakerhead, but I'm going to roll with it now. Jordans are only going to release, 1,000 pair of this one special release shoe. Well, that shoe, even though the same exact materials and cost of product go into making that than their shoes, the price could be triple or quadruple just because there's a limited amount of that, but way more people that want it than are actually available. So they can manipulate their own prices by basically releasing smaller amounts of their wine. So that's one side of things. So those are kind of the outside factors that will increase the price of wine dramatically so. Another outside factor that increases the wine dramatically so, increases the price of wine dramatically so, is it's a part of supply and demand. So if one person or one country, like China, decides that it's going to buy 90% of all of the wines of Bordeaux, and if they can't do that, they'll just buy the chateau itself, that kind of thing, then to get more of their wines, more access to those wines, then that leaves everyone else fighting over the last 10% of the wine. So definitely in the last like 20 years, we've seen this happen dramatically. So the prices of Bordeaux specifically, Burgundy specifically go up because top buyers in China and obviously the inequality rate in China is massive. So like the billionaires of China are buying up like literally whole chateaus of Bordeaux and affecting dramatically the pricing. So we've seen a price of Bordeaux that used to cost, $35 is now costing $85 because of how their control over the supply has shifted the demand in the rest of the world and thus the price in the rest of the world. Which, by the way, it's a lot of a status thing. So these really expensive Bordeaux called first growth Bordeaux, it's popular in China amongst all these like really famous parties to take these wines that cost, $1,500 a bottle, pour it over ice and top it with Coca-Cola and serve it as a cocktail at these parties for the rich and famous in China. And it's basically the same thing as like Jay-Z taking a bath, pouring Cristal into the bathtub. It's that statement of, I'm so wealthy, it doesn't matter if I mix this $1,500 bottle of wine with Coca-Cola. It's not about the taste of the wine. It's about, how rich I am because I am wasting this product. So it's really weird how those outside factors, and it's sad how those outside factors manipulate pricing so much because it's not the cost of the product. Now, sometimes it is. So let's talk about just medium range wines, not the really cult wines or the really collectible wines, because those are all about those outside factors. And let's talk about medium range wines. So if I'm a winemaker and I've got 10 acres of wine and I'm going to farm by hand, I'm farming organically, which just takes a lot more work. When I'm cutting the actual clusters of the grape, I'm choosing to only cut 60% of that and leaving the 40% that's not high enough quality for me. So that quality of the wine is going to go up, but also the price is going to go up because instead of using all the grapes and making more wine, I'm using less grapes, making less wine. But overall, I'm making less bottles of wine per acre, so the cost is going to go up, but also the quality is going up. So it's a direct correlation. Or if I'm a farmer, not a farmer, if I'm a mass producer, we're talking like any of the wines you'll see in like a 7-Eleven or a grocery store. They are not using people to clip grapes by hand and select only the best clusters. They are using huge tractors to go through and basically select everything and then use everything so they can make the most wine. And any faults that happen in the winemaking process as a result of picking some of the bad grapes, they can fix with chemical intervention, which you can't really do as much when you're farming and making wine organically or naturally. And that's a different discussion. We'll talk about that later. So that means that the price can stay way down for these mass-produced wines, which is great because everyone starts somewhere in their wine journey. No one starts their wine journey drinking $25, $35 bottles of wine, generally speaking, unless you're like growing up in a household that served really expensive wine. You get your start in the wine here, and then you go up in terms of quality. So I'm not digging on mass marketed wines. I'm just saying there's a reason why their cost is low. It's because they are not paying attention as much to the quality of the overall process, the integrity of the fruit. They're not trying to express that vineyard's personality. They're trying to make wine at a certain price point. So it's formulaic. So if it's a little bit moldy this time, we're just going to add a little bit more sulfur here and a little bit more copper over here, and we'll figure it out so it just makes a generic wine. There is a time and a place for that. Definitely not digging on that as a whole. That's a necessary part of our process. But higher quality producers that one step up are going to take that more extra time. And then the further step up, they might be using older vines, which produce less fruit. So again, it's all about supply and demand. If they can only make so much per vineyard, the price is going to go up. The quality should also go up. One of the biggest factors, though, that goes into a wine's price is the oak that is used in the winemaking practice. Oak is very expensive. So you can use Hungarian oak, you can use Austrian oak, you can use Slovenian oak, you can use chestnut instead of oak. You can use French oak, American oak, lots of different styles you can use. The primary oak that is used throughout the world, French oak and then American oak in the US and parts of the New World, some in Spain too. So American oak, generally speaking, costs a lot less than French oak. French oak, it's all about even like the vineyard that the oak trees grow in. So not the vineyard, obviously, because it's not a vine, but the grove, whatever you want to call it. Some of the most expensive oak barrels come from a specific forest that the tree has to be a certain number of years old, sometimes like 200, before they cut it down to make it into a barrel, which after using it for 3 years imparts no flavor to the wine. A new oak barrel, if it's like basic run-of-the-mill American oak, is going to cost you from about $100 to $200. It's like your basic cost of kind of a cheaper American oak barrel. And that's for new oak. The most expensive French oak barrels can cost upwards of $2,000 per barrel. A barrel is 225 liters, which is about 68 bottles of wine. So you add the cost of $2,000 divided by 68, whatever that price is how much more that wine has to cost to cover the cost of that barrel. And if you're using new oak every year, then that's going to be added into the bottle every year versus older oak. So I'm going to use that oak barrel for the first year. The second year, I'm going to use it again, but it's not going to impart as much flavor. So I might use that for the wines that don't need to age as long. The wines that I want to age for 30, 40 years, I'm going to use the new oak barrels. Wines that I want to be more approachable, younger, I might use the 1-year-old barrels. Wines that are meant to be consumed even younger, like pop and pour, I might use barrels that are 3 to 5 years old. So they're really not imparting oak flavors. I'm not paying for this extra barrel, so then the cost of that wine is way lower, and it's meant to be consumed younger. So it's really odd that sometimes the most expensive wines in the world are the least approachable to and least enjoyable to drink right when they're released. Because of the price of the oak that goes into the cost of that wine, price of the vines, that wine was made to age for 30, 40 years, and it takes a lot of intensity, talent, labor, quality of product, all of those things to make a quality wine that can age for 30, 40 years. But that means it doesn't taste good now necessarily. You're gonna drink that and you'll be like, what the hell? How did that get 100 points by so-and-so wine rater? Also, a lot of what goes into the price of wine is sometimes its ageability, its overall lifespan that wine's good for. Versus in the US, the average time that it takes from bottle purchase to bottle consumption. If anyone wants to take a guess, but it's going to be shorter than you